Hey everybody, it's Bust with our patch notes review for the 4.1 patch. Very exciting patch, the first patch, I should say the first major patch of 2023, ushering in the new competitive formats with a nice balance cycle hitting us now that we're going to get this monthly cycle of a major card release, the next month a minor card release, next month a balance patch. This is the balance patch type deal for the new roadmap, new cycle of releases, whatever we're calling it these days. And it's a pretty exciting amount of changes. And so I'm really looking forward to these for the future. And so before we dive into the cards, it is worth making note in terms of the competitive schedule. The Champions Unlimited Best of One will be here for the next couple of days. I do believe I read that it was supposed to be like a week long, but somebody messed up. So we are only getting 2 days of Champions Unlimited Best of One before the daily Rumble cycle switches back into Best of Three. And then on the 18th, that will be 2 Saturdays from now, next Saturday, if you will. It is the first Runeterra Open. And so this is just the beta tournament open. This is not a Worlds qualifier. This is just the single day 9-round event where you're shooting for the big trophies and the titles. But nonetheless, this is calling it a seasonals replacement isn't fair. That's what the Worlds qualifiers are. A mini seasonals in addition to seasonals, if you will. A big in-game tournament once a month is what this one will be. Very excited. Glad to see that come at us. And so before we jump in and actually talk about the cards, the things that I always like to describe in terms of the general gameplay, the general requirements in the Legends of Runeterra, the things you have to think about when it comes in terms of deck building is two kind of key concepts, if you will. And so what I think Riot does is if you have decks that are winning on turn 7 or turn 8 of the game, they tend to get nerfed. They have to get slowed down just a little bit. And the kind of sweet spot that Riot has kind of carved out is around turn 9. Typically turn 8 to turn 9, sometimes turn 9 to turn 10, but that usually turn 8 to turn 9 space is when games are starting to end. And so if you're slower than that, if you're playing some kind of real grind fest deck, some kind of Karma turn 10 deck that does big things with her flip ability, you're probably going to lose because the opponent has played a Champion Strength, they've played a World Ender, they've played a Feel the Rush, they've played one of these innumerable spells that typically just outright end the game around turn 9. And so you have to be able to do your big thing and achieve victory in that space. Or if you're in the more aggressive end of the spectrum, if you're in the aggro decks, you're trying to cast your last spell then. You're hoping to get your big final attack and an open attack on turn 8 or turn 9 because you know at that point you're done for. Your opponent's going to do their big powerful thing and beat you. And so that's concept number 1. Concept number 2 ties in to that aggro spectrum and to that if you are playing aggro decks, you have to be able to either overwhelm, elusive, or rally, right? You can't be having this thing to where you've got like, wow, a 4-4 for 3 mana and then a 5-5 for 4 mana, then a 6-6 for 5 mana. What a fantastic curve that sounds like. Your opponent just plays small unit and block every turn and you never actually deal any damage. And so you have to have some way around it, some way around the blockers, overwhelm, elusive, rally are the things that we always talk about in that sense, and that will tie in to a lot of our discussions as we look at these cards throughout the way. And so, as we jump into the cards, I wanted to talk about the nerfs first. I feel like that is the biggest set of updates that we're going to be seeing. These are the cards that have currently defined the format, and they are going to be weakened just a little bit. Now, first and foremost, the thing that I noticed out of the nerfs is the patch notes may or may not be incomplete. People on Reddit went and took notes of all of the changes coming from the reveal stream. Thank you to user Purple Foxy for compiling all of these on the Reddit. But the thing that I took note of out of here most especially are these two that I'm trying to highlight. Kane now draws to your hand with 4 cultists instead of 3, and then Aatrox now doesn't draw out of your deck unless you play 3 different Darkened. And so you used to be able to say play a Bloodletters on something, have it die, replay the Bloodletters on the summoned unit, play 1 more equipment, and then immediately have Aatrox coming in hand. Now you have to play 3 separate ones. And so with that sequence we just talked about, that second playing of the Darkened Bloodletters no longer counts, and you need to play a 3rd unique equipment, or I should say a 3rd unique Darken before Aatrox will come to hand. You can still play Kayn and have him count. You can still play Zolani and have him count. Those are darkened as well. But these did not make it into the patch notes. They did not make it into the nerf section. And I think that that's a big one to call out. Because as we are talking about our key and big points to Runeterra, the biggest explainer, if you will, in the current meta of having to win the game by turn 8 or turn 9 or so is Aatrox and the World Ender coming in. You have to just be able to win the game in that space before the World Ender comes online, or you're just going to lose to all of the Darken. And so I thought those were very important to call out. I think that these are changes to where both of the champions are still exceptionally strong. I don't think Aatrox Kayn is going to be leaving the format. You're not going to have nearly as many of these draws to where you just get to kind of freely drop Kayn on turn 5. You may find yourselves having to play 3 copies instead of 2 of these champions, so you just kind of increase your chances of naturally drawing them on time. But I think this is still going to be a major fixture of the format. Just the ability to draw these champions for free, so you get the card advantage without actually doing anything. That card advantage draws you incredibly powerful champions, and then the champions themselves, if you draw multiple copies of, they are built-in removal spells, with Kayn being the quick attack strike thing, the Aatrox being the triple single combat thing, and then Aatrox after that also generating the World Ender. And so these are just incredibly, incredibly powerful abilities. It's incredibly tough to look beyond this in terms of having a good game-winning game plan, right? If you want to, say, play Feel the Rush, you need some kind of ramp, most typically, to get your Feel the Rush online before turn 9. Even if you are ramping, you a lot of times just have to spend the mana and you don't have the 3 bank running into turn 9. And so in that kind of space, it takes a little bit of effort to get your big finisher spell online, to where these two don't take any effort. You just you don't even have to draw them, right? You just have to play other cards. Those will draw them naturally and bring it to your hand. And so I think these are still going to be the baseline good decks of the format, but I think there's going to be some new challengers in this turn 8, turn 9 space that will give Aatrox Kayn a little bit of competition, but not enough to completely wipe them out of the format. And so, to jump into the nerfs, the discard Jinx decks are taking a big hit. I was not surprised to see Jinx take a hit. I felt like Jinx was one of the prime candidates to take a nerf, and the Super Mega Death Rocket dealing 1 less point of damage to the face is quite relevant. It's very easy to find your spell playing against the Jinx decks and being like, okay, I have to stop at 9, right? If I'm at 9, I can survive for 2 more turns into the Death Rockets and then still potentially win the game. And now you have just a little bit more breathing room in terms of the Jinx abilities popping off. The next one with the Poro Cannon taking a nerf, it's probably long due. I feel like there's a real strong case that the Iceborne Legacy wasn't the problem card as much as Poro Cannon was the problem card, and it even makes note on here, the Poro Cannon has escaped the nerf chopping block at least half a dozen times. And so this was a card that was seeing a lot of play even in things, say, like Aphelios Fizz or Aphelios Victor, more likely to say. And it's probably just due. And so it is going to be a big, hamper to these discard-based decks. Like if you look at a deck like Jinx Lulu, one of the most powerful things you can do with Jinx Lulu is playing a Boom Baboon on turn 2, Jinx on turn 3, and then free discarding the Flame Chompers and getting that 4/4 Challenger attack out of it. Now, you can still do this with the Poro Cannon as it costs 1 mana, but you can't play a 1-drop in that sequence, or you can't play the Boom Baboon on turn 2, and so you have to play a 1-drop, play another 1-drop on turn 1, or on turn 2, just naturally have a Flame Chompers. Gets a lot more challenging to have those really high-powered draws, and then again, this doesn't fit into these like weirdly high-powered decks like augment decks, the Burblefish deck looking to take advantage of the elusives. This is a fairly wide-ranging hit on the Poro Cannon. It's going to weaken a lot of decks, and I think it's probably just due. And so I think Jinx Lulu will still be in the format, but it's going to be much weaker. I think she's probably going to lose that space as the top aggro deck of the current format. On to the next one. Quietus is another big change and a big update. This is most certainly worth talking about in the sense that you'd see people play cards like Braum, or you'd want to play Alawi, or you would want to play even something like Vagar, and know that your champion just gets aced by a 1-mana spell. And to a degree, that's okay, right? If you play a 2-cost card and it gets hit by Quietus, that's only 1 mana difference, whatever. You play a 3-cost card, that starts to suck a lot, but if you're spending 4 mana or 5 mana on a champion just to have it be in a place to where it gets killed by Quietus, it does a real number in terms of leaving that deck in the format. And it's like, I know you don't play against Quietus decks every single game of the match, but even if you have to go against that, say, like 10% of the time or 15% of the time, and you just get completely smoked every time Quietus comes up, it just takes a huge percentage off of your win rate. And so a very big update here. I kind of like the space that they put it in the sense that you still have some options with Quietus, right? You can still look to, say, play Ash Kindred and make usage of Quietus, but I think you're more so looking at this now as a spell that destroys an equipment, and then it may kill a card otherwise, as to where I think it was just way too efficient in what it did before. And so, nice little change there. Up next, we'll come back to the Eye of Nagakaboros. A lot of Tentacle cards did change, but the Eye of Nagakaboros, now a focus card instead of a burst. I'll come back and talk about this one more. Last but not least, in the nerfs is Katarina dropping her attack 1 point. And I think this is a very big change as well, because it's very easy to say, it's like, well, I just never blocked Katarina right now, she's just dealing an extra 2 or 3 points of damage each game, but that's not a fair assessment, right? What if your opponent attacks with a 3/2 Katarina, you want to block it with your 3/3. Now you're just out, you're just dead. That unit is gone. But in the space now to where you can actually block Katarina with a 3 health unit and have it survive, that's now getting you in the space to where you may have prevented like 5 or 6 damage across the course of the game, just because she lost a single point of health. She gets that 1 block in there, then you just don't block her the rest of the game. Then those minuses really do add up. And so I think Katarina's in an interesting space to kind of have an aside. I think it puts us in a interesting space in card design as to where the next card to talk about, it wasn't changed, but Opulent Foyer. And if you want to compare Opulent Foyer to the Black Flame says the first time you attack each turn, you get to summon the unit. It had to be that way because of cards like Katarina. So if you put Katarina under the Black Flame, you attacked, she rallied, then you just got to attack again. You had an immediate infinite cycle. But if you look at a card like Opulent Foyer, it operates when you gain the attack token. And so that's where we're seeing these Katarina Opulent Foyer decks now, as to where you have the Foyer on board. You play a flipped Katarina, you get a new attack token, you get a new Foyer token. She comes back to hand because you attacked, you replay her, you get an additional cycle of that. And I'm curious if there won't be kind of a space to where more of the cards just say the first time. And this reminds me back into Magic, as to where in Magic there's a card called Stoneforge Mystic. Stoneforge Mystic came into play. You got to pick an equipment card out of your deck and put it in your hand, and then the Stoneforge Mystic had a way to put that equipment into play for cheap. And so to avoid the Batterskull talk from the times of Magic, it's just an extremely powerful ability, as you can imagine, but it makes Wizards of the Coast then design every single equipment around Stoneforge Mystic. And so now say you want to print this really cool 10 mana equipment with this giant splashy effect. Under normal circumstances, that would be fair, right? If you play a 10 mana card, it should probably just outright win you the game. But you have this other dude just running around that lets you pick and choose it out of your deck and then just play it for an 8 mana discount at 2 mana instead of 10. You can't print that card anymore. And you do see a lot of I won't say a lot. I forget the designer. It's probably designer Dan that talks about the reason for rotation coming about and the average power level of the cards, and rotation dropping down the power level of cards so that you can print more high-powered things kind of in a vacuum, if you will. When you're not comparing the power level to the entirety of the system, but the power level compared to a smaller subset of cards. And I think that's the space you start to land in when we start to see these things like the Opulent Foyer. And so I'm curious if Katarina isn't so much the problem. I think to a degree rallies are a problem when you can do them multiple times in the same turn. I don't know if saying you can only rally once per turn is the answer, but there's going to be a decision that gets made somewhere in here, right? As to where either these cards say the first time, and so the Opulent Foyer says the first time you get an attack token, or something will happen to rallies. I don't think we're going to live in this landscape forever to where Katarina can get you multiple rallies, or these cards will activate multiple times in a turn. And so I don't have the answer there. I'm not a game designer. I just think that that's kind of an interesting space that we're going to see coming out. And that's very interesting with these Katarina changes that are coming at us, kind of being at the forefront of that. But she is most certainly weaker. I think she's still a arguably extremely strong champion. Getting these rallies over and over again is extremely strong. The Blade's edges are extremely strong. If you hear us talk about the aggro decks having to be able to elusive, overwhelm, or rally, how do we get those rallies? Katarina does it. And so I think she's not going anywhere, but most certainly much, much weaker with that loss of a point of attack. So up next, into the buffs, and this is why I wanted to hold on to the Eye of Nagakaboros. We do see a handful of buffs to the Tentacle theme. Alawi is getting +1 attack on both sides. Also with the nerf to Quietus, Alawi no longer dies to Quietus. Then we see the Nagakaboros does the spawn 2 on summon. It used to just be at round start, so now it's on summon and round start. And then Tentacle Smash reduced in cost from 4 mana to 3, which is an absolutely huge breakpoint in the lands of Runeterra. And so I think all of these things combined, more than enough to overcome Tentacle Smash, or I'm sorry, Eye of Nagakaboros just being a focus spell instead of a burst. And I think we'll probably see Alawi come back onto the map. As we talk about that situation, how do I elusive, overwhelm, or rally? The Tentacle theme has a lot of built-in overwhelm. And then Alawi with the rallies has the overwhelm as well. And so she ticks off a lot of the boxes of things you need to have happen to win a game of Runeterra. She has the overwhelm tied in. The tentacles have overwhelm tied in. This is a deck that usually crushes on like turn 7 or turn 8. And this is a deck that can attack through a lot of these smaller units of the format. And then she now gets to dodge Quietus. And so I expect to see her make a return. I'm kind of curious to see how she can kind of fit into the current metas in terms of how do we best get rallies now that things like Golden Aegeus aren't as good? Do we just play Katarina with Alawi because why not? And then even things like Tentacle Smash, knowing that you have that 3 mana breakpoint, you can play it just off of spell mana now, and you can boost your tentacles without having to tentacle slam another unit. Just a lot of really interesting updates. And so I'm very interested in this. I feel like she's kind of at the fringe right now. I feel like she's really just being held back by Quietus. It's like as you see Nora decks running through the format, as you see a lot of Swain decks that are just damage-based removal decks, having this big monstrous attack from someone like Alawi is quite strong. But I feel like she was just like toned down a little bit too much. And so I don't think that this is a deck that shoots up to like tier 1, the very top tiers of things, but it feels like a deck that's probably in the space of being in like tier 1.5, something that's very relevant in best of 3, and it's just a matter of finding the best usage out of these cards. You don't get the kind of free play Demacia amazing rallies that you used to, and so it's going to take a bit of figuring out to how to best use these Alawi cards. Up next, the Weapon Masters catching some more upgrades as well. Jax just permanently has Overwhelm. I assume they aren't taking Overwhelm off of the item. The Light of Acacia that has Overwhelm, I think. I don't entirely remember. We don't play too much Jax, but him having Overwhelm, again, fixes all of those problems. You have to have Overwhelm to win the games. But in terms of the Weapon Masters, I feel like the biggest updates are in the spells. Roar of Acacia now picks up the Weapon Master tag. This isn't the completely exciting one in my mind. It's fine. This is a good card. You should be able to play this card in your Jax deck. But the big update is Fish Fight. Fish Fight is one of the premier removal spells of the format. This is one of the top-notch reasons to be playing Vayne and Aatrox Vayne. A lot of the high-powered plays that come out of it are this exceptionally good removal spell. And so I think this fixes a lot of problems that Jax has, in that it was a typically not very interactive deck. You were just trying to win on the back of stats, and now that it picks up one of the best interactive spells in the game, we have a lot of potential for Jax to move his way up to the top. Just a very efficient champion, a very straightforward style of deck, picking up a lot of problems, or fixing a lot of problems that it had in the past. Up next, the Forge section, and I feel like this is the exact opposite of the Jax fix, as to where the problem with Ornn and all of the Forge cards aren't the amount of stats that they have. It's doing something relevant with all of those stats, and the updates here did not do anything to change that. And so, I forever talk shit about Ornn and Yasuo. I think they're all just garbage champions, and we tend to lose to them whenever we play them. I don't know who's the idiot in this in this situation when you just talk trash about Ornn all the time and also lose to Ornn all the time. Maybe that makes me the idiot in this situation, but I don't feel like this solves any of Ornn's problems. I think he had kind of a two-parter, right? He was just way too expensive. Your 7-mana champion needs to just immediately win you the game, which Ornn does not. And now these updates just giving them additional stats don't really fix anything either. And so it is a very powerful engine, the Forge mechanic, to where you have a small unit, you give it a buff with Forge, it dies, and then you get to carry that buff onto a future unit. But time has shown that it's just not quite enough of a viable strategy to be good. Now, making these units slightly better might be enough to kind of elevate this deck somewhere. I'm just not really sold with it. I don't think it's quite strong enough. I do try to think of things like Weaponsmith's Apprentice in terms of, say, like our friend Omenhawk, as to where Omenhawk is technically 6 stats for 1 mana. Weaponsmith's Apprentice is now 5 stats for 1 mana, but some of those stats carry over through the rest of the game, and it just doesn't mesh. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't fit right. I don't think any of these cards are going to be manageable, and so prove me wrong with that one. I don't know. All right, so up next we have one of Ryze's World Runes. Instead of refilling 2 mana, it refills all of your spell mana, so probably 3, But I still feel like, I don't know, I'm not the person to talk to about Ryze. The number of Ryze games I've played in my life, probably 3, maybe 4. I know I played 1 or 2 Ryze decks, and I was just like, nope. That's not it. This is not for me. I do not enjoy anything that's happening here. But I think personally, what makes Ryze good is his Runeterra ability, the thing to put all of the burst spells into your deck. I think the idea of the world runes is interesting. As we play a game like Runeterra, you have limited space on the board. You have to manage the space on board with these scaling kind of abilities, with putting units on the board and having that kind of conflict. And do I play units? Do I play my runes? Can I stop an opposing attack by not playing a unit, and things like that? I think it's very interesting, but I don't think that the world runes are the path to victory for Ryze. I think you're playing Ryze in your deck because of the burst ability thing, and then I just don't think the burst cards are good enough at this point. And so maybe this boost will take him there. We'll have to wait and see. I'm leaning towards this just being a dud. Up next, Shadow Shift costing 2 mana. All I can think when I see these 2 mana spells now is oh fuck, it's a boost for Seraphine, right? There's some way this is going to work with Seraphine and the 2 mana spells ability thing, but I'm not entirely certain that this is a big deal. It is kind of interesting whenever you upgrade a champion spell, right? This is the spell attached to Zed, so Zed in turn also gets an update here, but it's not something that I think is going to be a relevant splash into Constructed. And so we can move on from Shadow Shift. One of the relevant updates for Constructed, though, is Hate Spike. Having Hate Spike hit this 3 damage space is absolutely huge. 3 mana is the key breakpoint in terms of stats for all cards in Runeterra. Now that Shadow Isles has access to this cheap removal spell, you're most certainly going to see a rise again of the likes of the Viego decks, the likes of the Kindred decks, the likes of the Evelyn decks that like this ability to have the Hate Spike as their kind of key early game removal. It kills Misfortunes at 3 mana. It kills so many relevant units. It just immediately elevates all those decks back up. And so I think this will be one of the more highly played cards out of the patch. And this is definitely going to bring more of a rise to those more control-ish Shadow Isles-based strategies. Up next with Master Yi, I do like this update to Master Yi, and I do like to see Riot kind of expand on these abilities. Having to see something happen is incredibly challenging to do. It just gives your opponent so much opportunity to where, with Master Yi, you had to invest like 3 and 4 and 5 turns into getting him even anywhere close to leveling up. And then your opponent had a ton of time to interact with him into that point, and he needed to be in combat to get those level ups as well. And so now, at least allowing Master Yi's damage to carry over is quite strong, is quite powerful. He does quite a lot as a champion. The round start ability is very big in reducing the cost. The flow to upgrade his stats is big. That carries across everywhere. And now his future ones having that potential to level up is pretty big. I don't remember the exact wording on his flip, but it's fucking strong. I think he attacks and strikes the weakest enemy at burst speed or something. Your opponent doesn't get to block with it, and so very strong with Master Yi. Now, the problem I've always had with Master Yi is we say we don't like to half-ass anything. We like to whole-ass one thing. That's the Ron Swanson way of life, if you will. And Master Yi is kind of half-assing a lot of things. He has a lot of spell things tied in, a lot of combat things tied in, dealing damage tied in. He doesn't do one thing well. He does a lot of things poorly. And so that's always been my kind of weakness to Master Yi. I don't know if this is enough to elevate him to the next level. Probably not, but definitely an upgrade having this change to the level up requirement. Up next, we'll come back to Maokai. Shyvana also getting the same treatment. Pretty relevant for her. Same deal. She doesn't have to see the level up anymore. And so now if you're playing Shyvana on like turn 5 or turn 6, she can come down immediately leveled up and being much more relevant. Having to see the damage was, again, quite tough to do. But now just having any regular dragon damage level up sight unseen is a pretty big deal. Second thing to call out with Shyvana is her fleeting strafing strike. The single combat for dragons only costs 2 mana for her. And so another upgrade for Shyvana, a big boost to these mid-rangey dragon style strategies. I think we might be in a format to where dragons have some potential. It's tough to say if upgrading Shyvana is enough to bring back dragons, but they have caught some upgrades recently. There was the Empowered Dragon that's going to have Overwhelm. And now with these upgrades to Shyvana, it's a lot of fixes to the dragon's problem, right? Again, Elusive, Rally, Overwhelm. The main source of Overwhelm for the dragons was the Dragon Egg card. And without it, you just didn't have that power. You had to play Rallies, and now Rallies were taken away without Champion Strength. And so it's a big upgrade to the dragons, having her be a little bit more effective here. So up next, swinging back to Maokai. He catches an additional point of attack. Okay, I don't know, man. Like, I've never been impressed with Maokai. I granted, not much of a Maokai or deep player, but I don't feel like 1 point of attack is what was holding him back. And so go for it if you want. I don't think this is a very big deal. Same deal with Tristana. She now has impact in addition to quick attack on her front side. It's reasonable. I'm trying to think if there's you start to say it's like, okay, well, can we now play this with something that cares about keywords? And so do we have a way to work this in with, say, like a Kaisa maybe something applies there. But again, I don't think adding impact to Tristana fixes any of her problems. And so I don't think this is a particularly big deal. Now, if we start to see cards in the future that say, like, give all of your units with impact +1/+1, then sure, maybe that becomes a relevant upgrade then. I did want to mention at some point, Riot does tend to kind of like preload balance patch changes to things that are going to be relevant in the future. And so if you think back a few patches ago, they put a bunch of upgrades to, say, like Kennen together and some recall things. And then as the next set came out, recall was a very relevant keyword. And so this could be some kind of foreshadowing to a future set and upgrades to Tristana. Sure, if that's the case, then it might be strong then. But in terms of what we have right now, this is not going to push her into the realms of playability. Up next, we have Lissandra, and I think this is a very interesting space. Now, again, I'm not the kind of person that played a ton of Thralls. I'm not entirely certain what was holding Thralls back, but that to me is the kind of classic example of a deck being too fast, as to where Thralls was consistently winning games on turn 7, turn 8. It had the potential to win games on turn 6. It was just entirely way too powerful, too fast. That's when we started to see the nerfs to the Frozen Thralls up to 9 and some of these support cards getting nerfed a little bit. Now, Riot kind of cycling back and having Lissandra also advance the Frozen Thrall by 2 on the one that she summons. I'm curious how close this gets Frozen Thralls to being a relevant deck again. It's always had the tools it needs for success. It has a lot of good removal. It has a lot of good stall. Has that overwhelm aspect that you need to close out games. Has the things like promised time zone. Whatever the fuck that thing is that doubles your landmark countdowns. Like, it has a lot of serious raw power to it, but it's just a little bit slower now. And I'm curious if this countdown 2 on Lissandra is enough to push it ahead, or if, as we were talking about, say, like Aatrox, to where Aatrox is just free. Right? You just play equipment, you draw your Aatrox, so that doesn't take any work, you're guaranteed to get him. Aatrox gives you the World Ender, you now have your game-ending spell with no effort. As we were talking about Lissandra, we said the doubler time zone, the supporting cards, all of this other shit you need to make Frozen Thralls work. Is it just too challenging to have Frozen Thralls work when you can just play Aatrox and have it all come to you for free? I think that's the other kind of interesting aspect to Lissandra. But this strikes me as something being like right on the fringe of throwing the Thralls right back into the mix. The deck has so many positive Runeterra elements to it, between the removal and the overwhelms and the high power and everything, that it just needs that little bit of a nudge to come right back into constructed relevance. I just don't know if this Lissandra update is enough to do it. I'm admittedly not a Turbo Thralls genius, and so will be interesting to see. I put this one in the interesting category. But also interesting, we have Kale. Now, Kale is one of these champions that I thought was going to be one of the highlights of the World Ender. I thought this was just a really, really powerful ability. It does a lot of what you just want to do. She helps your units without too much effort. Having a giant quick attacker is okay. And then on the flip, she just wins the game, right? And so if you can set up these situations with Kale to where she's good without a lot of effort, then you're just rolling, you're cruising. That's everything you want out of these mid-expensive champions. But she was just a little bit too expensive, a little bit too hard to work with, and so she didn't really pop off. And so I am curious now that at 5 mana, if she can make a bit more of an impact. I am a little bit more skeptical than I was earlier on at the release on the kind of initial impression, but this is the thing you need to pop champions off into relevance and take them out of that space of Ornn, right? Ornn costs 7 mana. Ornn is just never fucking relevant. Now that we push Kale down closer to the cheaper zone, then she has a lot more potential to come in and be relevant. Speaking of the cheaper zone, Lucian reduced down to 1 cost and then lost a point of attack and a point of health. Very interesting to me. Like as the price of cards gets cheaper and cheaper, they have much more space to be abusable. And I am very curious with Lucian. Like I don't have any immediate combos to think of in terms of him being cheaper, or if him only having 1 health is now a net negative, right? Because he dies to File Feast, he dies to Spirits Unleashed. But it's always interesting when you're saying like, ooh, here's a highly, highly, highly powerful 1 cost card. And the other thing you have to kind of consider with cards like this is you don't have to play it on the first turn of the game, right? There's nothing stopping you from saying, okay, it's turn 6, I'm going to play a 5-drop and a Lucian, and let's see what we can do from here, right? That's completely valid, completely irrelevant. You can look at it as a 6-cost card that costs 1 mana, and you're not playing until turn 6 or turn 7 of the game, and that gives him a little bit more play, a little bit more interestingness. I'm not sure if there's any like flip combos as you start to push yourself up the curve, but reducing his cost to 1 does certainly open up some spaces like that. Now, as I kind of try to think on him, I do feel like this is probably a bit of a negative, only having 1 health. I think if he was a 2/2, he would be extremely interesting, but there's so many games when you're playing these like very aggressive decks to where you're like, just lose to Vile Feast, right? And that's the space that Lucian falls into now. All right, so up next with Albus Pharaohs. This is another one that's kind of interesting to me. The upgrade and the attack ability to where it starts at base 3 instead of base 1. And my kind of space with this is like, what if we just think of this as a different Decimate, right? As a way to just like, I don't care about the combat stats, I don't care about anything. This guy is a Decimate that draws a Jace. And from that viewpoint, I think it's fairly interesting. Again, like of the decks I don't play a lot of, things like Jace Lux are right up in that space. But, this is a very kind of interesting closer ability now, I think, in the sense that if all you have to do is say, okay, it's opponent's turn, they've attacked, everything's all done, I'm just going to play Albus Pharaohs. Next turn, I'm attacking and dealing 6 damage guaranteed. Like, that's a fairly interesting and powerful thing when it's attached to a unit, right? That's the big difference between Albus Pharaohs and Decimate is, if it's turn 7 and you need some value, you need things to kind of go on, your opponent's at 16, and that Decimate is not doing anything. But if you're playing something like Albus Pharaohs, it's coming down, it's a real unit with real stats, it draws a champion, really gets that value chain going. And so I'm kind of interested in him in that sense, in that it does some things that the Jace Lux deck needs to do, and that it gets a way to directly deal damage to the opposing Nexus while also being a fairly big value engine. And so we'll see. Again, he's another one in that space of decks I don't play a lot of. The 7 mana units I play, the 7 mana units I play are going to be things like Captain Farron, but he costs 8. And so I guess the 7 mana units I'm going to play are going to be something like Savage Reckoner. And so Albus Pharaohs is a little bit different than Savage Reckoner, but I think this is a very interesting space again, in that he does a whole lot. Like just having him attack and deal 3 damage, kind of whatever. Having him attack and deal 5 or 6 damage is a pretty big deal. Up next, Weight of Judgment drops from 4 mana to 3, but only deals 4 damage to a follower instead of 7. And so another kind of interesting update. It's such a huge breakpoint. Like, I can't stress that enough. I didn't say tons and tons about it when we were talking about Tentacle Slam dropping from 4 to 3. Hitting that 3 mana breakpoint is absolutely huge. That is that space to where you've kind of soaked up mana incidentally. Now you have 3 mana that you just need to spend on something, and you can spend it on that Weight of Judgment. We've seen this breakpoint apply over and over and over and over and over again. That if you have a single unit, give it +3/+3, going from 3 to 4 knocked it out of the game. The things like moving Relentless Pursuit from 3 to 4 didn't knock it out of the game, but that was a huge breakpoint as well. It's just you'll see this time and time again, as if you can play the spell purely off of spell mana, and then you kick it up to 4, it immediately becomes unplayable. And now being in this space to where you drop it down to 3, you really have to stop and evaluate how good that's going to be. And I think this is, really close to excitement, a little close to being like, well, I can play this outside of Shuriman Tellstones, right? Being in this space to where you can kill some champions, but you can probably kill pretty much every relevant unit in the game with only spell mana. And so I think this gives a pretty interesting boost to Shurima, especially as we move on to their new card in the game. Last but not least, in terms of the buffs, we have Dragon Collar going from 6 mana to 5, and he has a tune, so he kind of technically costs 4 mana. This is another one to where I struggle. It seems like this is a extremely powerful ability. Like summoning a 6/5 elusive every turn of the game is quite strong on a unit that can handle its own in combat, having 5 toughness and taking down 3/3s pretty easily. But it just strikes me as, is this like the best thing I can be doing for like 6 or 7 or 8 mana, right? Putting a understated 5-cost unit on the board, then playing a bunch of spells multiple times in a row? Probably not. That's a pretty big investment in what you're trying to do. And as we kind of like look at Aatrox and compare the World Ender to other cards, how easy it is to Aatrox and World Ender compared to building up the Thralls board, I think that's an excellent comparison for the likes of Dragon Collar, in the sense that it takes a lot of work to get some payoff, and that payoff probably isn't enough for all of the work, even with the reduction in mana cost. And so that brings us down to 2 more cards. We got 2 new cards in the set. I alluded to a bit of that with the talk of Weight of Judgment, but that card will wait just a moment. First and foremost, we have Soul Cleave, which is a pretty interesting one. And so a 3 mana slow, you kill an ally to summon 2 ephemeral copies of it. And this is one of those cards I don't have the brain to piece together the kind of combos that you can do with this stuff, but the combos are going to be there. I can see a card like this and go, oh, this is going to make some kind of degenerate combo. I just can't piece it together just yet. And so you can look at this and immediately think of, say, something like Viego, right? What if I sacrifice off a Camaveran Soldier that summons 2 copies of the Camaveran Soldier? The Camaveran Soldier then summons 2 copies of the Encroaching Mists. Like, what can we do with these like 4 and 5 summons now with the giant Encroaching Mists in Viego, right? That kind of thing should start to immediately pop off. What if we have that the Undying, right? The 2/2 Last Breath that comes back into play. So we kill him off. We get the 2 ephemeral copies. Now those ephemeral copies come back. We have 3 of that guy running around now. Fairly easy thing to kind of come across. What if we look at something like Commander Ladros? Commander Ladros comes in, cleaves the opponent from 20 to 10. Then you get from 10 to 5, 5 to 3 or 2, however that works. Getting 18 damage off of 2 cards. Not the craziest thing that you can be doing. And so I don't have the answers to Soul Cleave. It's one of those cards I can look at and say that this has a lot of merit and a lot of power to it, but that's not the kind of like deck building style, the deck building piece that I can really like piece together quickly. And so it is there, play it with your new Lucian, play it with Callista, whatever you're wanting to do. There's a lot of opportunity out of this thing. It's just going to be a matter of finding the strongest thing to do with it. That doesn't immediately lose the game if that unit gets killed. And so that's one of those kind of high risk, high reward things of dealing with a slow card that gets counterspelled by the unit dying, is that you're going to have to be kind of wary of that effect. But a lot of potentially powerful things coming out of this. Last but not least, we do have the Shuriman card, Castigate, which kills all followers. Another very interesting one. Of course, the closest comparison is the Ruination, which doesn't really see play. There's also Buried in the Ice, which is in a very similar space, which sees a lot of play. And I'm kind of curious the space that Castigate will fall. It's like I see a card like this and just immediately say like, oh fuck, I want to play Pirates, and this this is no good if we're playing Pirates and this thing comes on board. But then you also have to look at it from the viewpoint of like, well, what if opponent plays Castigate spends all of their mana, and we still have a Misfortune. That sounds fairly rough for the opponent to deal with. They're still going to take a bunch of damage. And what if they're in the space to where they had to castigate while we have Misfortune and we have 2 mana, and then we get to play 2 more mana worth of units. We play a Mirai Warden after the fact, and now we're attacking for 8 or 9 damage. And so it's very interesting. There's a lot of power here. This strikes me as the kind of thing that is going to fit in best of 3 more so than in best of 1. I can really see the emergence of Shurima-based lineups really focusing in on cards like Castigate, and then looking to just get like 1 targeted ban on the champion-centric deck, and trying to focus on the non-champion-centric decks, and then having the Shuriman like Echo list, and then the Shuriman, or I should say the Shuriman Echo Jinx list, and then having the Sun Disc list hanging out, and really focusing on taking down one specific deck from the opponent, and then castigating everything else away. Just not the type of strategy that really lends itself to laddering, but I think there's a lot of best of 3 potential here, and it's probably just going to piss me off, So bust out here trying to play aggro decks all day, and then they got to print cards like Castigate, and so I'm cautiously optimistic about Castigating it. I think it's going to be a best of 3 play, not so much a best of 1. And so that's going to do it for us today. There were some bug fixes in here. I don't think that they're really worth going over. And then again, the competitive changes are about to come upon us. I'm ready to jump into those daily events. I'm ready for the new seasonals tournament to hit. Sounds like a load of fun to me. And so, good stuff. I hope we helped get you a little bit prepared for the new cards that are going to be coming at you. And as we always say, agree or disagree, be sure to let me know. I'd love to hear the feedback. And so that is going to do it for us today. I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Hope you maybe learned a thing or two along the way and had a good time watching. So this is Bust, and we thank you for being here.